You also had, in terms of some of the more bizarre projects, you had attempts in Germany which were becoming quite successful at mind modification, not strict mind control, but mind modification in terms of indoctrination, which was used by the SS masters to indoctrinate the SS troops in their special rooms where they were being impinged by 27 kilohertz high-frequency energy off of special loudspeaker systems, which hit them in the rear of the head. Okay, the initial work that I know of that was carried on by the Germans involved the use of sound techniques, which produced a semi-hypnotic effect on the persons, groups in the SS being indoctrinated, so that the indoctrination training would take more readily. This equipment at the end of World War II was captured by what they call the Buck Rogers flying teams that went all over Germany looking for new technology, things that they wanted to bring home to the United States. Quite aside from the 30 railroad cars full of patents and paperwork which they brought back to the U.S., they found all kinds of little interesting pieces of hardware. And one of them was this indoctrination hardware, which wound up in Los Angeles, went to the Technicolor Corporation to replicate the electronics. And the speakers, which were very specialized, wound up with Altec Lansing to be duplicated. I know this because of a certain friend of mine who was involved in the project at some level at the time. And after they analyzed what had been built and how it worked on the human head, the hardware was replicated, went into production, and nobody knows where it went. But it was used, of course, in the U.S. somewheres. Exactly where is an unknown at this point. The other factors that go on is, of course, the Germans started this. The Japanese also had their own program going using a totally different approach. They were using microwave energy and a special technique working on the head. I do not know how successful they might have been, but the project was taken over by the U.S. at the end of the war and swept totally under the rug with a complete silence. The work continued basically at Brookhaven National Laboratory starting about 1947. And there they had already in place, having been smuggled across the ocean from Germany, a considerable number of refugee German Jewish scientists. And they were part of the mind control projects and certain other projects. They went to work at Brookhaven, Brookhaven being a national laboratory, to work on the continuation of mind control techniques. Now, since Brookhaven is a national laboratory, it is funded by tax money, federal funds. They therefore have to make a report every month as to what they're doing, all the projects underway, and a general report of progress, lack thereof, or whatever. And this went on for some 20 years. And then after approximately 20 years, or close to that, somebody in Congress decides to start reading these reports. Instead of just stuffing them in some cubbyhole, they started reading them. They found out about mind control. At that point, somebody in Congress blew their lid, said, what, mind control? If they're building this sort of stuff, they might use it on us. Cancel the project. The project was canceled, and the scientists were thrown out of Brookhaven. And they were looking, of course, for a new home to continue their research. And they found it not far from Brookhaven, which was in the eastern half of Long Island. Further east to a location called Montauk area, and there was a military base called Fort Hero, which was operational. It was an Army base and an Air Force base at that time. The Army part of the base had been there since before World War I. The Navy was there with submarine pens since before World War I. But the Air Force moved in the early 60s with some specialized radar systems they were testing long range over the ocean. And eventually the SAGE system was moved in there about 1963. And that was decommissioned about 68, 69 because they went to the DEW Line project in Canada, still longer range and further north, and all of the SAGE systems around the U.S. were dropped. In that interim, the base was abandoned, was held as surplus property by the General Services Administration, and this group who was already there stayed.
The mind control group.
The mind control group. And they continue their projects. Now, other projects under the Phoenix Project, and I cannot say I know all of those which have been put under that little umbrella. Phase 1 was mind control, and that was moved to Montauk. That is to that location at the abandoned base.
Would you comment a little bit on the other German inroads into mind control, namely the usage of cocaine, the regular usage of cocaine by their officers and engineers?
Well, there you get into a very touchy subject, because in the United States today, cocaine is considered a controlled substance and a drug which will do you harm. I know a British scientist who came over to the U.S. prior to or just slightly after World War II, and when he was going through school, he regularly used cocaine. He said everybody in England did. Nobody had any bad effects from it. Nobody considered it a drug, and nobody considered it harmful. It is, after all, a derivative of cocoa, the cocoa leaf. And while it is a sort of energy and psychic booster, he used it to stay up all night and study for his exams, and then be out bright and early and never going to bed, to his classes the next morning to take his exams, and he passed them. Now, this was not limited to England. It was also being used in Europe and in Germany, and at that time there was no control on the substance prior to World War II, and for some time thereafter. And it was regularly used by a lot of these people as a sort of psychic booster. Now, here you get into a very delicate matter in terms of the medical interpretation of what cocaine, not talking about other drugs, other hardcore drugs, but cocaine itself, as to whether or not it is habit-forming or not. I understand generally considered it is not habit-forming in the use or misuse by young people under the age of 21. It can lead to the use of other harder, more dangerous drugs, but of itself might not be considered so dangerous. None of the reports by the LaGuardia Commission in the 30s in New York indicated there was any problem from marijuana or from some of these other drugs, and they were then, at that point, wide open in usage. There was no control on them in the 30s, in the U.S. or elsewhere, to my knowledge. The controls on these were only established after World War II, and would not come down as a tight, hard control with the controlled substance laws we now have until 1965. It was that late. And that, of course, included LSD and many of the other mind-bending drugs, but cocaine was not in that category. These people use it regularly as an energy booster and to sharpen their wits, their mentality,
and probably meditation and tap into higher database. Possibly
meditation. Definitely some of these compounds, particularly peyote, as one example, and LSD is a synthetic, but peyote was a natural derivative from the peyote mushroom, was definitely used and still is used by the American Indians as part of their rites, but it has been used by many people experimentally in the past as a means for expanding the human consciousness and looking into other areas beyond the normal physical reality. The government couldn't have this for one simple reason. They were interfering with the CIA's MK-Ultra program and certain other programs the CIA was involved with, which involved mind manipulation. And if you get somebody with an expanded mind, with more awareness and more understanding, they will be able to see through these other programs. But if you cut off the means,
somebody patched your memory,
right, if you cut off the use of these materials or their availability, then you're not going to be able to take a better look around you. You might not be able to find out that your mind has been tampered with on one of the government projects, which were rampant in the U.S. and Canada. In Canada, from the CIA, from the late 40s onward. And it's basically the chemical drug aspects from the early to mid-50s. And MK-Ultra was only one program. There were many others. You also had other programs underway, which started in 47, went on through 52, for finding the basis for changing the memory structure, changing the personality, completely and totally, if the CIA or whatever agency wanted to do this. And these programs were instituted by Dr. Wilhelm Reich in Rangeley, Maine in 1947, when he signed a 5-year contract with the CIA to do research, which was, according to what he was given to understand at the beginning, the initial point, the CIA was, quote, interested in two aspects. One was development of psychic ability, finding a means to improve or enhance psychic ability. The second part was they wanted to find a means to deprogram people who had been programmed.
To brainwash them?
Well, they didn't.
Old memories?
They didn't state that to Reich, but he soon found out that's what they wanted. And he blew his stack and falsified the experiments.
contract killers if necessary.
Right.
No.
He found basically the means whereby you can totally reprogram a human mind at will and change its structure, its intent, its the memory patterns, the memory functions, commands being built in to control that individual so they were no longer a free agent, even though they might be under the impression they were. Certain command methods could be used to have that pre-programmed person on command do something which had already been programmed into them by the CIA, NSA, or whoever was using these techniques. This was all part of the mind control programs of the 50s and the 60s and the 70s. And this stemmed from basically German work and from some Japanese work, because the Japanese work comes into the picture later in the 70s onward using RF techniques, microwave, and satellites. But this required a great deal more research in between after the beginning programs of the 40s and the 50s. Wilhelm Reich threatened to expose the whole business to the public, and he was then hauled into, they attempted to haul him to court once in 1954. He refused to show and he got away with it. He sent a letter to the judge. But he was inherently unhappy with what he had been used for and said he would never work for the CIA again. In fact, all of his lab personnel were armed to the teeth to keep out one particular government agency, and that was the FDA. If any FDA personnel ever showed up on any of his lab property, orders were to shoot first and ask questions afterwards. Other government agencies he cooperated with.
It was very interesting for me, the connection that you were discussing yesterday between some certain indoctrination techniques by Indian yogi cults that were later introduced into the CIA, indoctrination techniques that involved some specialized sexual practices.
Oh, this had nothing to do with yoga practices. This was a direct offshoot from the Wilhelm Reich techniques and Wilhelm Reich's research. Basically, I will not go into the whole 9 yards of it on camera, but basically what Reich discovered in that 5-year period from 47 to 52 was that there was a great relationship between the mental functioning of the human and sex and the orgiastic state, as he called it, and that he found that in the orgiastic state, if you could hold that point where the person was about ready to have an orgasm, but not have the orgasm, you were held at a peak point of nervous excitation. At that point, this human subconscious and the human conscious locked together in an open line. And everything that's in the subconscious becomes available to the conscious mind.
Basically, the soul connects to the mind.
Right. Therefore, you can reprogram that person if you know what you're doing, and Reich found out partially how it could be done, and the CIA, after many years of work, and the NSA found out how you could complete this so that a person could be programmed with certain inbuilt mechanisms, functions, memories, change memories, whatever. And while the initial techniques were more physical, after sometime in the 70s they developed purely electronic techniques which would induce the orgiastic state and hold it electronically. Right. And these pieces of equipment are in every hospital in the United States which accepts federal funding by law. It requires a double computer. One is a standard floppy, because they use these equipments normally for EEG measurement or shock therapy if they need to use shock therapy in the psychiatric wards. But with the induction of a special second floppy which goes into a portion which is normally locked, this is the so-called orgiastic floppy, which induces which induces that state in the person who is wired up to this equipment, which now is not with big pads but with very tiny little probes which are 50 millimeters square. And in the certain appropriate points of the body they are attached. I won't go into all of them, but all over the body in very critical nerve ganglia points. That person is pushed and thrown, if you will, into the orgastic state, and then by computer they can change that person's mind, memory, programming, whatever. And when they're done, shut it off and install a final command that they don't remember anything that's happened. And then, of course, the person is released. No drugs, no messy techniques of the earlier Reichian form, and they can be done to a patient whether it's a regular patient or an in-out patient, at any institution in the U.S. that has its equipment. Private hospitals that are not accepting federal funding do not have the law requiring them to carry such equipment, but it is recommended that they do. But every major hospital that has federal funding has required by law to have at least one of these machines there, and they're usually kept under tight lock and key. This is how far some of the programming techniques have gone in this country, and this is only one example. A friend of mine who works in one of the hospitals upstate New York has personally seen the equipment, and he didn't say he had seen it in operation, but I think probably he has. And he knows exactly how it works and exactly what is done to make it function, and that it can be used for those purposes. This took many years of research after Wilhelm Reich, and of course Reich died in 1957 in prison after he refused to reveal what classified government work he was working on in early '57. And the judge said his hands were tied, he had no choice but to commit him to prison unless he could show good cause why he should not, which meant he had to talk about his classified work, and he says, I can't. So he went to prison and died there. And of course came the famous FDA book burning of Wilhelm Reich's works. They went around and literally confiscated thousands of Reich books, and in a particularly vicious form of Nazi book burning went ahead and burned the books. These have been republished since, most of them. I think there are a few that are still out of print and held privately. They didn't get all of them, of course, but they got them in the bookstores and the places where they were normally purchased.
So this was an Orwellian blacklisting.
It was a form of Orwellian blacklisting.
From the libraries and from the academic memory of this society.
You're right.
But to summarize here, so basically the Germans developed mind control through chemotherapy and hypnosis.
Correct, and they used very heavily scopolamine and other chemicals, but scopolamine was their principal weapon for hypnosis and mind bending, if you will. And it was used very effectively and with hypnosis to change a mind and do a programming under chemical means.
And later on, because not only the German rocket scientists got shared by the Allied powers after the Second World War, but so were all other secret scientists, so were their SS specialists, Gestapo tutors, the propaganda ministry specialists that were shared by the Allied powers. And obviously all these mind control experiments were moved and continued in the other countries. Here in the United States, I've read a lot of books about parapsychology development in the Soviet Union. In Russia, of course, the other goes wrong. Always one would read about such advanced technologies developed in the United States, but obviously they were developed everywhere.
In all the major countries.
Yeah.
There's so many different organizations that are affected with mind control that we cannot be misled into believing that it's just one particular group of people or another. We can't even say that this is Democrats or Republicans. No. This has nothing to do with party lines. What it has to do with is a New World Order agenda. When I was under mind control, before I was rescued and my mind and my memory restored, I was totally robotic. I had no ability to think for myself. I had no ability to question or to reason. I could only do exactly what I was told to do. One thing that I was told to do was to attend a White House cocktail party. This was during the Reagan-Bush administration while Ronald Reagan was president. It was on one occasion in particular that I heard Ronald Reagan talking with then Prime Minister of Canada, Brian Mulroney, who was also involved in this New World Order effort. And he said at that time that he believed the only way to world peace is through mind control of the masses. This is terrifying in proportion, especially when, having experienced mind control, I know that there is no peace of mind under mind control. Without free thought, there's no free will. Without God-given free will, there's no spiritual expression. And I wonder, what kind of a so-called world peace can we have where people have no peace of mind, where they have no spiritual expression, when they're not even in touch with their own identity, or it's very frightening in proportion when we consider the ramifications of what all mind control entails and how anyone can justify a robotic society under the so-called world peace guise, which is actually the New World Order of world dominance. It's my experience that Ronald Reagan took orders directly from George Bush. George Bush was one of the highest up that I'm aware of, if not the highest up that I was ever exposed to during the course of my White House Pentagon level mind control victimization. George Bush began with the United Nations. He went on to head our CIA. And then by everything that I witnessed and experienced, it was George Bush who was in control of our country through 3 administrations, because Ronald Reagan answers to George Bush. Then George Bush was in office himself. And after that, Bill Clinton went into office. And I heard Bill Clinton and George Bush once discussing how when the American populace became disillusioned with Republicans in control of our country, bringing us into the New World Order, that Bill Clinton, as a Democrat, would be put into office. And it was also my experience to have witnessed Bill Clinton answering to George Bush. So we certainly aren't blaming everything on George Bush. There's a lot of other players that are named in our book, Transformation of America. But it's very important that people understand who's at the top of this effort so that they know exactly what the problem really is. Instead, it was a very natural process in one regard when he rescued my daughter Kelly and I in 1988. Kelly and I were safe for the first time. We weren't being hurt in any way. We saw how Mark was very gentle with his animals. His pets loved him, which was highly unusual for us. Everyone that we'd ever known abused their animals. It seems that abuse of animals and abuse of children oftentimes goes hand in hand. But nevertheless, we felt safe for the first time, and we developed a trust for Mark. This trust factor was very significant in the recovery process, because it was when we felt this kind of trust that the memories of what had happened to us all those years under mind control began flashing across our mind screen. And Mark taught me how to write out my memories, to journal them, to put them on paper. I was extremely fortunate to be able to accurately recall all those things that I'd photographically recorded under mind control, particularly on the White House Pentagon level. This information that I was able to remember as a result of Mark's expertise is what's been documented in our book, Transformation of America. My daughter Kelly was not so fortunate. Once she began remembering, she went into a respiratory failure and was hospitalized in Humana Hospital in Anchorage, Alaska. It was through a series of well-orchestrated events by some of her politically affluent abusers that thrust Kelly into the custody of the state of Tennessee, where she remains a political prisoner to date. Kelly is denied rehabilitation due to who and what she knows is involved in MK-Ultra mind control, due to who and what she knows is involved in her personal victimization. Kelly is waiting the day that good people will join voices and be effective in taking back our government and getting these secrets that have been covered up under national security released.
So-called national security.
So that she can be helped. This blanket of national security is certainly threatening the security of our nation when it covers up such horrible crimes as have been perpetrated against humanity by those in control of our government.
Okay. Hello, I'm Ted Gunderson, former Senior Special Agent in Charge, FBI, Los Angeles. I have with me today my dear friend, Bryce Taylor. Bryce, you and I had an interview some time ago, very formal interview, in that it was, like as I recall, 2.5 hours long. And we're going to update it today, so it'll be rather short. Let me ask you a few questions. Today, for the first time, and this is February 22nd, I think it is, 1998, you name names. Before today, you refrained from naming names. Would you like to tell us who was involved in these various activities that you've described before?
Yes, I would, Ted. It's real scary for me, but I'd like to go on public record saying that my owner under mind control was Bob Hope, and that I was abused and used as a mind control sex slave by Ronald Reagan and a lot of different presidents, LBJ, Reagan, Ford, and I was programmed to have computerized mind files by Henry Kissinger, where I was used as an operative within the intelligence faction of the government, targeting people that he and Nelson Rockefeller had an agenda to bring in certain individuals into the fold, they called it, to work on behalf of the New World Order. And so they used me to manipulate and blackmail people in order to bring them in, people that were either wealthy, had a lot of talent, or knew something, had connections or whatever.
Or money.
Money. It always, the money was the end goal of everything.
And what were you asked to do?
I was sent in usually with very detailed programming instructions where I was drugged and electroshocked and food and sleep deprived in order for them to lay in programming that would be specifically targeted to a certain individual, and I would be, it would depend on what the profile of the person was, but I was usually sent in with instructions to seduce a person and then to deliver a whole regime of instructions or information that they had programmed me to deliver.
So you were used for blackmail purposes?
And to keep the people that were working with the New World Order agenda organized.
And now we went into detail last time about how you had your photographic memory, and you could read a series of documents and memorized it, and they could call on you and say what happened on what was on page 395, and you could come forth.
Right. Actually, Henry Kissinger took me sent me into the National Archives and different places in Washington, D.C., where I was instructed to go in and have perfect photographic memory. So instead of like reading and memorizing, it was just that I was programmed to be able to photograph with my mind different documents so that anything that they would need at any time would be available to them.
Did they ever expose you to any psychiatric examinations of any sort?
Actually, I was being monitored at UCLA Neuropsychiatric Institute in Los Angeles, and Dr. Jolyon West was involved with this. They did a lot of mind control programming there, and I reported there at different times when I was told to, for my programming to be either updated or reinforced or whatever. My father also had brain surgery at UCLA Neuropsychiatric Institute when I was 16, and after he recovered what he was able to recover from that, he knelt down on the floor at my bedside when I was 16 and said, "Honey, I've lost control of you. Big things are happening and I'm really sorry, but there's nothing I can do to help you."
Because if he had resisted, he would probably have been taken out.
Right.
So Dr. Jolly West is head psychiatrist, head of the psychiatric department at UCLA.
Yes, and he worked with Reagan back in the time when Reagan was governor, and they were working on the prison population there in California, working with the mind control experiments on the prisoners.
So Do you feel like you know Jolly West real well? I mean, what kind of treatment would he give you?
Oh, I was, usually it was his staff that I reported to, but they would drug me and do all kinds of electroshock, light and sound therapies, things where they actually put electrode caps on my head and did very sophisticated programming that I don't understand the technology behind it, but that's what they did.
So what about military bases? Did you ever receive any treatments at military bases?
I was taken to military bases all over the country at different stages of my programming and was subjected to all kinds of equipment there, deprivation tanks, sensory deprivation tanks, spin chambers, light and sound technologies that they used, virtual reality where they were using electroshock and drugs and hypnotic technique. I mean, it was just endless.
Now, when you mentioned the presidents a few moments ago, are you saying that you had sex with all these presidents?
Yes.
What about Jimmy Carter?
I never had sex with Jimmy Carter.
How about homosexual sex with somebody at the White House?
What, Jimmy Carter?
No. I mean, with another woman.
Oh, yes,
Did
I
they
did.
program you
Yeah.
to have sex with other women?
Yes.
You want to name those names?
No, I don't. This is the worst thing. I don't. No.
Okay. All right. Very good. Why are you laughing?
I hate it. It's embarrassing. It's just
Oh, I'm sorry
it's
if I
terrible.
embarrassed you.
No, I mean, it's just really awful. Anyway,
Well, no, you're programmed. It's not your fault.
I know.
I know it's not your fault. Okay, I'm sorry. Sorry I
That's
asked the
okay. That's
question.
okay. No,
Okay.
that's all right.
Okay, well, anything else you want to add?
Just that George Bush, that Kelly, my daughter Kelly, was used as a presidential model sex slave for George Bush at the same time I was used when Reagan was president. And she was only like 2.5, 3 years old when that started with Bush, and that, you know, right now she's in a group home because she's so severely disturbed
This
from
is
all
Kelly.
the programming. Kelly.
Yes, and I've had you on my radio talk show, and we put out a plea for financial help for Kelly. I hope that you
Right.
did receive some results.
Actually, I haven't received any financial assistance
At all? Not
all.
even from the radio talk show? Well, I'm sorry about
So,
that.
it'll be forthcoming.
We tried.
That's right.
Okay, thanks very much.
Thank you.
Well, welcome to Chicago Health Television. I'm here with 4 people who have just given a seminar called The Insider Secrets to Government Corruption. And Chip Tatum is one of the people. Welcome to the show. Also, Ted Gunderson, welcome to the show. Bryce Taylor, welcome. And Barbara Hartwell, welcome to the show.
Thank you.
Okay. Now, I'm going to just direct the questions to each and every one of you. I'm going to ask you a couple of questions about what you were doing and what the purpose of the seminar was. So many of our viewers and listeners have not really had exposure or especially detailed information about what we're doing. So if you could just simply generalize and tell us what's going on with the insider corruption. Who'd like to start?
You want me to start?
All right, Ted.
Why me?
First, tell us a little bit about you.
Well, I was in the FBI for 27.5 years, and at the time of my retirement in 1979, I was the senior special agent in charge of the FBI Los Angeles office. I had over 700 people under my command. We had, for jurisdiction, most of Southern California, over 14 million people within the area over which we had jurisdiction. And let's see, I was honored as the Outstanding Law Enforcement Officer of the Year in 1977 by the AFL-CIO Metal Trades Union in Los Angeles. I was asked by Attorney General Griffin Bell when I retired to coordinate security for the Pan American Games. I worked as a consultant for the '84 Olympics, and I was a consultant to the California Narcotic Authority when Governor Brown, Jerry Brown, was governor.
Well, you've certainly had a lot of experience, haven't you?
Well, yeah, I probably overdid it, but as far as my introduction is concerned, but I figured I'd throw in the kitchen sink.
No, that's important.
Well, it's important to establish credibility,
Exactly.
and I have credibility, in spite of the fact that many people would like to say I don't have credibility, because since shortly after I retired, I developed information personally about just extensive corruption in the government, not only at the federal level, but all the way down to the city and state level across this country. And, I have the documentation, I have the research, and I have the personal knowledge, and I have personally investigated many of these situations. That's basically an overview.
Well, when you say corruption, there's a specific kind of corruption you're talking about that you focus on. Isn't that true?
No, really, corruption is pretty all-inclusive of... I have information about corrupt judges, corrupt law enforcement, prosecutors, county officials, judges, and it runs the gamut. It's not really specific at all unless you... And as a matter of fact, it includes a number of areas. Like, for example, I have developed information in Nebraska in a case I investigated in the late 80s involving international trafficking of children and kidnapping that ties into an organization in Washington, D.C. known as the Finders, which is a covert CIA operation. Has been active since the early 1960s. I've furnished this information to authorities, Attorney General of the United States, to the FBI. Nobody does anything about it. Now, if that isn't corruption, I don't know what is. That's corruption at a major level.
Oh, yes. And what you're doing here at the Global Sciences Convention is talking about corruption that is related to Bryce and Barbara and Chip, isn't that so?
That's true. It all overlaps. It involves drugs, involves pornography, involves prostitution, it involves cults, pedophilia. There's people, as Chip will tell you, the CIA's involved in bed with the mob, the mobsters, and the people in the White House that have been active in blackmailing people, individuals, and also at other levels, not only the White House. And it just basically runs the gamut.
Well, is there some overarching or underpinning ideal or idea, some purpose behind this corruption, rather than just making a little money on the side or whatever? Isn't there?
The bottom line is to take over the country and the world.
For what, though?
Power, greed. This goes back over 200 years, back to 1776, with the establishment of an organization known as the Illuminati. And if your listeners don't know what the Illuminati is, they need to run down to the library and look it up and do some research, because on May the 1st, 1776, a fellow named Adam Weishaupt, German, set forth 25 goals at the request of the Rothschild group that they needed to initiate in order to take over the world. We're talking about destroy the sovereignty of countries and destroy religions. And that's where it really started in modern day. And right today, believe it or not, and we have the documentation for this, we are probably 90%, their goals have probably been filled at the rate of about 90%.
And what's happening now?
Well, we have, for example, executive orders by the President. Executive orders were established initially for the President to give orders to departmental heads. The Presidents of the United States have actually set up executive orders with unlimited power, bypassing the Constitution, and there's executive orders in place today that can take over all banking, take over all forms of transportation, take over the harbors, take over air transportation, take over industry, take private property away from us, and the list goes on and on and on. And also there's an executive order in place that the President can declare martial law in the event of a national emergency, in which case we have a dictatorship. I'm not sure we don't have a dictatorship today. It's probably a socialist government, totalitarian government.
And aren't we close to some kind of national emergency right now?
Well, there's a possibility of biological warfare, and we just had a scare out of Las Vegas, Nevada, anthrax scare, and yes, I think there's a good possibility that could come down. Now, a fellow named Larry Wayne Harris, who was apprehended by the FBI in Nevada recently, in fact, it was on February the 18th of this year, they thought he had some anthrax in his possession. It wasn't. It was some not antibiotics, but anti-serum vaccine. Vaccine. And fortunately, that was true. But at least one good thing came out of that. It alerted the American people as to what the problems were and the possibilities of what could happen to us.
Okay, now your seminar here tonight. I want to go on to a couple of the other guests here. You summarized what you were doing here tonight, and you had a 3-hour seminar. And our show is kind of short, so I'm going to move on and get another piece of the puzzle here. Bryce, what about you? How about you introduce yourself?
Yes, my name is Bryce Taylor, and I'm an intergenerational satanic ritual abuse survivor and government mind control survivor. And basically the ritual abuse was used as a trauma-based conditioning for mind control that I was put under by the CIA and was programmed at military bases and at NASA centers around the country in order to have my mind in mind control that was guaranteed through national security that I would never be able to remember or tell. However, due to an accident that I had, I was able to start having flashbacks, and I started remembering being prostituted and used in pornography. From the time I was very young, used in child pornography, and then as I grew older, I was used by different presidents and governors, and just I was flown in helicopters to different areas in Hollywood to be used by some of the people, the actors in Hollywood, as well as being used by different, like I was saying, different politicians. But Henry Kissinger was involved with creating a lot of my high-level programming, where he was able to use the technology that they had gleaned in all the research that was done to create in my mind what he called government mind files, where I was programmed to have a perfect photographic memory, and I was used to, as a human tape recorder of sorts, to pass messages between the officials and the global elitists that are planning to bring in the New World Order.
And that was the point I was thinking of. It. All of that you were used for on the service of this New World Order. Is that right?
Yes, I was. And actually, Bob Hope was my owner and owned also my daughter. And through that, we were used as like intelligence operatives to be sent in with specific instructions that we were programmed to target different individuals that they wanted to be able to enlist to work also for the New World Order.
And how did you get to be owned? Were you bought, or did Bob Hope buy you? Or?
Well, there were shows where they have like slave auctions where people are actually purchased, and the way I understood it was that, I mean, my parents and myself never received any money, and they just, actually the CIA kind of came in, I believe, and took over a lot of people that had been satanically, ritualistically abused, knowing that that type of abuse creates multiple personality disorder, and that this population could be used as a non-paid slave labor force without their own knowledge or awareness.
And how rampant would you say this is?
Well, I think that if you would look into a lot of the history of people that have spoken out in the past all over the country and how this has been all covered up, I think it's very rampant. And I think that there's people that have been programmed and used that are coming out now and speaking out. And when I speak at mental health conferences where I help psychiatrists and mental health professionals help deprogram and their clients, there's a lot of people now that are coming forward naming the same people and the same agenda of the New World Order and are in need of information to help their clients deprogram.
And, well, later you'll get to say a little bit about how some people may get some help watching our show, or our listeners, from you. And thanks for sharing that with us. Now, next, I want to move over to Chip from the Tatum Files. Is it Tatum Files?
Tatum
Chronicles, I'm sorry, yes. Would you say, you've been on our show before, and would you say a little bit about yourself and how you've contributed to this seminar tonight?
For over 20 years, I was a government spy working for the Defense Intelligence Agency, the Central Intelligence Agency, and the United States military intelligence entities in various capacities throughout the world in varying positions. In the primary years, I worked in the Southeast Asia environment. In the mid-'70s, I moved into Yugoslavia, Czechoslovakia, Romania. In the early 80s, I went into what people know as the black helicopters flying around in military operations in Task Force 160, based out of Fort Campbell, Kentucky, under the control of the National Security Council. From there, I went into Honduras and Nicaragua as a special operations CIA pilot flying for Ollie North and the National Security Council, bringing drugs seeing the drugs were brought into the United States. We simply brought the drugs out of the Contra camps into designated areas in Honduras. They were then transferred into military and civilian aircraft and brought into the United States, dispersed to our children around the United States.
Now, are those drugs, this is getting off the point, but are those drugs, are they used somehow in the mind control with people like Bryce and whatnot?
Well, some of the drugs that we were producing in the Contra camps, we were not only producing cocaine in the Contra camps, but there was a small bulb, green bulb, that we would produce a chemical out of. It comes from the nightshade family, and it's nicknamed Burundanga, the voodoo drug, and we would utilize that as a controlling agent for most of our activities. Yes.
I see. And now, how do you corroborate the evidence, the things that the other people were saying here today about the New World Order and whatnot? Could you?
Oh, there's no doubt. I sat in a meeting in 1989. My handler in the CIA was Colby. I was then passed on to George Bush when he became director of the CIA. As a trusted ally of Mr. Bush, I sat in meetings in Jupiter, Florida. We did the deeds for this group of New World Order participants. We called them within the bounds of where we worked, the Olympic cartel, because they were dealing in not only drugs, but we were dealing in petroleum, foods, and people. So
slavery, in other words.
That's right.
Okay. Well, thanks for being on the show. Talking to you individually is one thing, but having all of you on one show together is quite a powerful experience. Barbara, would you say a little bit about yourself?
Yes. I was used in CIA black budget operations, many of them of a military nature. I was a mind control victim in these same black budget operations, and I was used as a propagandist by the CIA to help bring in the New World Order. I was actually a media person, I still am, radio and TV and print journalism, and basically they set me up through a CIA front company to propagate the New World Order through New Age propaganda. That's about the best way I can say it. And that's a comment I want to make. A lot of this New Age material that we see coming out today, it is an Illuminati ploy to bring in the New World Order. It's sort of a diversionary tactic, part of it. It's a way to get people to be complacent and under mass mind control. And that involves a lot of the trance channeling, all those sorts of things. It's a way to sort of lull people into a false sense of security based on a false spirituality.
And now, Barbara, can you, we're going to take a break here in a minute, but will you be able to tell our viewers and our listeners how to distinguish between what seems to be the real material and what seems to be false, some disinformation on the New World Order?
I can try.
Okay. All right, good. And stay with us. We'll be back in just a little while, and with my group from the Insider Secrets to Government Corruption. Okay, we're back, and you're watching Chicago Health Television. I'm down at the Global Sciences Congress at the Seabreeze Hotel in Daytona Beach, Florida. And I'm sitting here with 4 people who know the insider secrets to government corruption. Now, in case you just tuned in with us, we had on the previous segment, everybody introduced themselves, and they talked about what has happened in their life and how they know about this government corruption. So right now, we're going to talk a little bit about how once they've come out and spoken about what's happened in their life, the consequences to their life and their families, and who wants to start with that? Barbara, how about you?
Okay. I can say that I've been under very severe harassment pretty much for the past 4 years, since 1994. And interestingly enough, 1994 was the time at which I started to speak out, not publicly even, but just to tell people some of the things that I'd been involved in.
What did you start saying?
About what?
In 1994, what did you start saying that created
Okay,
some harassment?
okay. Well, it was something I think about breaking my programming also. But when I broke my programming, which means I started to remember that I had been programmed, that I was leading a double life, in essence, for a number of years, many years. It's when you break your programming, it's very difficult. Now I'm getting a block. See, I'm experiencing the block. Basically, they place blocks on you. But when you break your programming, they'll do whatever they have to do in order to make sure that they re-recruit you, or they can stop that from happening. So if they can't stop you from remembering, they hope that they can stop you from speaking. All right? And some of the things that were done to me, I can tell you, they flew black helicopters over my home at rooftop level. They had surveillance vans sitting across the street from my home, different ones, by the way. There was one there every day, and every night, but they changed frequently. I was followed. I had tails on me a lot. They sent government agents after me, posing as somebody else on numerous occasions. I had phone taps. It was like living in a fishbowl. I was also hit with exotic weapons, microwave, pulse weapons, laser weapons, and these are things that can knock you out unconscious. I've been knocked unconscious by these weapons.
All right, let me interrupt for a minute. Now, Chip is a person who would know about the existence of those weapons, right? Isn't that so? You may have even used some of those weapons.
I may have.
Can we go over? You may have. Right. I know you may have. Now, could you say a little bit about that, about those weapons?
I can say that I was a pilot of what they call the black helicopters. We based out of Fort Campbell, Kentucky. Now we're out of several different areas with those aircraft. I can say that I flew test platforms for the government that we would drop an antenna out of the back over a mile long to test electromagnetic waves, microwaves, and so forth. I can say that we've tested pretty darn impressive laser technology here, and as a matter of fact, just recently we all heard the Air Force announce that they were going to use their laser technology to blow up a satellite in space. I believe that was in October of last year.
Okay. And do you know personally of weapons that could knock people out with like a pulse beam or whatever it was? Are there those such things?
Yes.
Okay. Okay. So back to you. So your harassment, is it continuing today?
Oh, absolutely. It happens every day of my life. Every day of my life I wake up and I wonder what's coming next. The important thing, I think it's important, really important for people to know, is you can't let them intimidate you no matter what they do. So I don't. And I go through a lot of bad stuff, but I still keep talking, and they're not going to shut me up unless they kill me.
Okay, good. Is there a possibility of that?
Absolutely. I've had death threats made, not directly to me. I certainly have had them made to my colleagues, people that I was working with, trying to disseminate this information. They've been made to people who were willing to publish my material, my written material, my research on this stuff. Yeah, it's definitely a very risky thing to do.
Yeah, I'll bet. It's scary to be right when the government's wrong or something like that.
Yeah, you got that right.
Okay. All right. Now, who else? Bryce, how about you? Will you say a little bit about what happened with you?
Yes, actually in 1987 I began remembering what had happened to me in form of flashbacks, and I actually had a threat made to my life. I was being tailed, my phone was being tapped, and I couldn't understand why anyone would be so interested until I started having more and more memories. But actually I had to be relocated. My therapist was instrumental in helping me be relocated to an island because I received in my purse a book and on the island, and when I was writing the book I was constantly harassed. My car was totally demolished. Everybody that was helping me, their tires were slashed, and I ended up having to move from place to place to place in order to stay alive. I lived in like 6 different states in just a very few years trying to get this book together so that I could go public, and and stay alive to help my children one day. And you know, I've had the helicopters over my house too. I've had my phone tapped. My phone is always tapped. And the most recent incidents that I had was when my office was totally destroyed by fire on January 1st of this year, as I was helping other survivors and people with what I know as the latest brainwave technology. So it just continues. And then if I didn't think it might have been an accidental fire, they delivered 2 bags of ashes to my home that was from this fire.
Are you afraid for your life?
Actually, I would say that that's a very large possibility. However, I'm really more afraid of living in a society where this continues to happen and where my children are being abused and everyone else is. And so I'm not afraid to die if that's what it takes.
Yeah, I
lay my life down.
I totally agree. And I want to say something about the car stuff that she was saying. That I was spending at one point an average of $100 a week on car repairs. They repeatedly hit my tires, my timing belt, my radiator, my brakes. They cut my brake line. And they don't want us going anywhere. They want to keep us in a state of virtual, like a hostage. I was actually living in a motel for almost 2 years under unofficial house arrest and with no transportation. That's how bad it got until Ted stepped in and told me to get the hell out of there no matter what it takes. And it took him to break me out of the trance, even thinking that I could get out.
Uh-huh. And Ted has been your deprogrammer?
No. Ted has been my friend, I would say. And Ted is a person that has helped me out. He has been following my case. He has been documenting my case. And he has made depositions so that if anything happens to me, that he, as he says on the deposition on video, we will know why.
Okay. Well, thank you.
Ted was also instrumental in helping me when I was attempting to get out initially, and ways to stay safe and ways of security and what to do and how to document all of my memories and send them out with safety letters so that if anything happened to me or my children, that everybody that has my material was instructed to make it more public.
How did Ted initially get to both of you?
I was referred to Ted through a doctor, a therapist in California, Dr. Catherine Gould, who is been very instrumental in this whole thing of helping ritual abuse survivors mind control.
And Barbara, how about you?
I met Ted last August at the Global Sciences Congress, where I was a speaker for the first time in public about my situation. And Ted was also a speaker there, and that's how I met him.
Okay. Ted, how about you now? Since your involvement with, you were a government employee and everything, and now you're investigating the government, what's happening?
Well, let's see. I really saw no signs of corruption when I was in the FBI. We had a great organization. And frankly, if I had, I would have made an issue out of it. I retired, and I took on a case, triple murder out of North Carolina. I don't want to go into details. We don't have time. But making a long story short, I obtained a confession from one of the assailants. There were 7 people involved in it. And this was a girl that told me that the Dr. Jeffrey McDonald was the case, did not commit those murders. They were committed by my satanic cult group. I went on public television and radio, and people just came out of the woodwork from all over the country, told me the same basic story. And even though I knew nothing about satanic activity, I said, you know, there's got to be something to this, because these people would not, under any circumstances, be able to furnish the same information unless they were individually involved in this. So that's where I first went public, and then after that, the harassment has been quite intense at times.
Have you had death there?
Well, I've had 6 attempts on my life.
Is that so?
Yes. I've had 3 occasions when gunmen were after me, and by divine intervention, I didn't go where I was supposed to go. Strictly by divine intervention, believe me. And I've had the other attempts on my life. The last one was in spring of 1993. I was back in Nebraska investigating what we call the Franklin Cover-Up book, which involved pedophilia, pornography, prostitution, satanic cult. Some of the leading businessmen in the state of Nebraska were identified by the children. 80 children came forward. And these children, these perpetrators have been named in a book, so you don't have to worry about a lawsuit. The Franklin Cover-Up by John DeCamp, Harold Anderson, past publisher of the Omaha World Herald, Bob Wadman, Chief of Police, Omaha, was named. Eugene Mahoney, who's head of the Nebraska Forestry Service, was named. Other leading citizens were named by these kids as being pedophiles involved in this ring. But anyway, the last time that made on me to harm me, I was driving from Omaha to Lincoln, and the lug nuts had been loosened on the right front wheel and the left front wheel of the car, and it came off when I was doing about 75 miles an hour. And I was able to control the vehicle. But this is just, these are the more serious attempts. Otherwise, I've had surveillances. I've had telephone taps, and I have a way of checking to see if I have telephone taps. In fact, I did it in a very logical manner. I had an individual call me, and use a certain name, a name that he never used with anybody else, and within a few days after he called me, he received a phone call at that number, his wife did, asking if so-and-so lived there. So there's the only place somebody could have picked it up was off telephone tap at my number, right? Exactly. And so those are little techniques that I know about in order to check it out. I've, on the surveillances, very frankly, I chase them out of the neighborhood.
You do?
Ted, tell them how somebody canceled your plane reservations on the way here.
Well, that's right. But I mean, I had, what I do, when I have a surveillance sitting outside my house, I put on the gun, of course, and I go out and I drive by about 3 miles an hour and just look at him. And I do a U-turn and come back 3 miles an hour and look at him. Then I do that about 3 times, and I come in and right behind him and sit and park and look at him in the rearview mirror. And they get fidgety and they start. Well, I had one guy take off and run a stop sign on me.
Really? Can anybody use that technique, Ted?
Well, not like
I'm going to remember that.
Well, it's very effective because it intimidates the hell out of them.
Mm-hmm.
And
Not anymore.
I've got to tell you this. They come into my house and have been for years when I'm sleeping. Now, these guys are professional burglars, and Chip will tell you all about that. And the reason I know they come in and out periodically, is because they leave little signs. For example, one morning...
That's right.
Calling
They leave
cards.
calling
CIA
cards.
calling cards.
Just to harass you and scare you.
Oh,
yeah.
absolutely.
I had a
Just to
pen
let
in
you
my
know
house.
they were there.
A U.S. government pen. It said U.S. Government Skillcraft. It was left on my dresser.
Well, what it is, they're just letting you know they can get in your house anytime they want to.
Right.
And what happened was one night, I went to bed about 11 o'clock, and I had a letter that I was going to fax the first thing the next morning and left it on my desk. I got up the next morning, it was gone. And then I have folders, boxes with folders in them with the labels up. Every once in a while, I'll look in there, and one of the folders is turned upside down.
And they'll do it on purpose just so that you know that they've been there.
Yeah,
just
they're
to
trying
remind you that they know exactly what you're doing.
Okay, now we're going to need to take a break, and after this break, we're going to find out from Chip who he thinks is responsible for some of these, the harassment. So stay with us. Okay, thanks for being with us. We have a very powerful show here tonight, and we're returning to Chip Tatum, who's going to tell us a little bit about who's been doing the harassment.
Well, you know, Ryan, in the industry, whenever we get a tasking down to, and what they're talking about is a neutralization, we'll normally use 3 techniques. We'll intimidate, which is basically what they're talking about, or we'll coerce a target or surrounding individuals of that target, and that's using force of some sort, or we'll terminate them. It's all that simple. It's hard to say exactly who it is, but it's whoever has something to lose. And I think these ladies can probably tell us better than anyone who it is that has most to lose by them coming forward.
Well, you know what strikes me, and I'm thinking about some of the viewers out there, and I'm trying to talk a little bit from their perspective. There might be people who have never heard of any of this before, and they're going to think, they may have all kinds of thoughts about it. But then why would our government go to such lengths as harassing and telephone calls and doing some of these things? What is it? What do they have to hide? So why would they be so afraid of a woman coming, or a group of women, or some people coming and saying these stories?
Well, the truth is a very powerful thing, and some can't abide by having the truth come out. The atrocities that have been done in the past that are coming out now, we read in major media, is the use of American soldiers for tests and AIDS research, and I think syphilis research. A group of black American soldiers or black Americans were used for that. So the atrocities, and men died from that. I mean,
Right.
they physically died from that. It's no different than today. People actually die from the things that these women were used for. I'll tell you that now. Whenever we needed in the agency, if we needed a talent, if we needed someone to come in that could get close to our target. For example, there was one that we had in Vietnam. We needed someone to get close, and she actually used a knife that had a ice pick edge, and then she'd use venom on the end of it. It would be placed in the base of their skull, and she would assassinate them while they were making love. I wouldn't doubt that these women might be used for something like that in the past. So anyone who wants to come forward and expose this, especially if they're going to tell who their handlers were, there's no statute of limitations there, Ryan.
Right.
Those
That makes
people can
sense.
be placed in prison for the rest of their life or receive the death penalty.
I see. So then it makes sense. Now,
May I ask Chip a question? Chip, if you can give a direct answer to this, what agency would be involved in these type tactics? Would it be Special Forces, i.e. CIA trained, or what?
Normally it would be a CIA trained, someone who has gone through that training, but to say that the CIA is involved in this is very difficult because we don't operate as a single intelligence entity any longer. We work on an international basis. I've worked in the latter years with the agency. I was actually tasked across to an international group that comprised of Danish intelligence, Turkish intelligence, U.S. intelligence, and British intelligence. And we would task on from there. We would pull in talent, ex-Delta Force, ex-Special Forces. We even used African Special Intelligence. So, it really depends. I can tell you now that the orders for a lot of what we did came from some people associated with the G7 group of countries, not necessarily the United States.
G7 meaning what?
Well, the financial countries that are involved in the G7 summits.
okay, well, thank you all for being on the program today. And now, if there are any viewers or listeners out there, they want to get help, maybe they've been ritually abused, or maybe they're involved in a court case, or they just need to talk about something like this, what would you suggest? Who would they call? What would they do?
Yes, Ryan, I think that people could call in California, there's a LA Women's Task Force on Ritual Abuse, and I have a number where I could refer people to, and that number is area code 213-650-0807. And there's also a group in California called MASA, which is Mothers Against Sexual Abuse, and they could obtain legal defense information there. And I think that this number that I gave you would be probably the best source.
Okay, thank you. Anybody else? Ted?
I have a number, an 888 number. I'd be glad to help if it's at all possible. I am very, very busy because I don't have a staff or anything. But my 888 number is 888-609-2916.
Okay, thank you. Now, Barbara, don't you have a foundation you're working with?
Not a foundation exactly. I'm trying to start a fund to raise money so that we can investigate and document and legitimize some of these things, that legitimize the fact that these things have happened to us. I do have that, but there's really no phone number that I can give connected with that, because at this point it's my home phone number and I really don't want to give it out.
Okay, fine. So, go ahead.
Yeah, well, another suggestion I have is that people call my 888 number and ask for a copy of my research. It's important that individuals are aware of what's going on, and we have the documentation. Chip has documentation. I have documentation. These ladies have documentation. It's an educational process. And I have my own radio talk show. It's on in the mornings from 8 to 10 on satellite. It's Galaxy 1, Transponder 17, 5.58 audio wide band, where I'm trying to get the word out. I also have my own television talk show in Las Vegas.
And what station is that on and the times?
That's on at station KKJK, Channel 19, non-cable in Las Vegas, Nevada. But I'm doing everything I can to educate people. And, you know, we're not just a bunch of clucks sitting up here. We all have credibility, and we have the research, and we've been there, done that. This guy has, I have, and these two ladies.
Yes, you have, and I can vouch for that. Chip, you also have material available, and I know we've talked about it before, but would you say what you have and give your numbers?
We do. We have a number of books available that is actually the documentation that shows the corruption. You know, many people talk about the government's involvements in some of these nefarious activities. We have those in books that part of the government harassment that I receive is because I wouldn't turn those documents over to them. I didn't want them to burn out their shredders. You know, they had enough work. So, so those documents can be obtained by calling 1-800-201-7892 and ask for extension 58. We additionally have a website, and you can access our website, the Black Ops Reporter, by going to www.2.net, scroll down the page and click on Black Ops. And if you'd like to email me, you may email me at chiptatum@aol.com.
Okay, wonderful. Thanks for being on the show, all of you. And I applaud you for being able to come on and say these things. I think it's really hard. It would be hard for me, and I think it would be hard for other people out there, and you're courageous to go ahead and do this. And it's a service that we need, that the country needs. And so stay with us. Chicago Health Television, and let's say that again. So stay with us for Chicago Health Television, and I'm Ryan Elliott. Thank you.